Revelation 3133. From the 25th and the 26th of May 1944. Earthly or spiritual expression of power. You may accept every announcement with complete faith, for it is purest truth because God Himself sends it to you. And if something seems incomprehensible to you, submit it to Him who will not leave you without an answer. And His spiritual helpers are always ready to enlighten you where there is still darkness in you, for God's will is to make you knowledgeable, and God's will is always fulfilled by those beings of light. Beings of light are recipients and providers of strength from God. Their activity consists of filling everything without strength with strength from God if it turns to God of its own free will. But this strength will always have a spiritual effect, and therefore this strength will not be so obvious that it is recognizable to the human being who is far removed from the spiritual. Always the spiritual beings, which only fulfill God's assignment, will order the mental activity of people who turn to God Himself in their desire for truth. This is the spiritual activity of these beings. And this activity is always successful as long as people do not resist it. Resistance, however, exists when the human being is either indifferent towards the truth or desires it by excluding the eternal deity, that is, when he tries to penetrate the truth purely intellectually. Then those beings cannot approach him, for he is surrounded by beings of darkness who want to guide him into erroneous thinking and thus find welcome acceptance for their mental whisperings. For against their will, thus without willingness to receive, people are not taught by beings of light, otherwise it would be a compulsory development. The dark beings can therefore also influence people mentally but never carry out a spiritual process which requires strength, which is therefore also apparent to people. By creating something which did not exist before and which goes beyond the natural ability of the human being, it is different with the execution of actions, which as such lie within the realm of human ability, only requiring more or less physical strength. These are carried out with the life force flowing to the human being, which can also be strengthened by his willingness to perform those actions. This life force is also imparted to him by spiritual beings according to his willingness to do good or evil. The beings of light constantly have strength from God at their disposal which they constantly receive and pass on, just as the dark beings receive it from their producer who receives his strength from God but uses it for God-opposing activity. The attitude towards God or his adversary determines where the strength flows to the human being, just as the human will uses it for good or evil deeds. An expression of strength can extend to natural or supernatural achievements, but it will always have to be called vitality because these actions are always carried out by people who have a certain ability to do so and which can only be considerably increased by the supply of strength. But the process of a transmission of spiritual thought in such a form that the results are also visible, thus audible, to other people, is to be assessed differently insofar as it is a purely spiritual emanation of strength which neither contributes to the preservation of bodily life nor to the strengthening of bodily strength but only promotes the higher development of the soul. And such a transfer of strength can only take place on the part of beings which are themselves recipients of strength from God. But spiritual strength is lacking in the beings of darkness and therefore they cannot distribute it, and even less can they induce the human being into an activity which requires spiritual strength. So that something comes into being which the human being is incapable of without a spiritual supply of strength. For then every person would have to be able to write about the same subjects without any means of assistance and in the same time, even if they differ from each other, as well as the powers of darkness would have the same strength at their disposal to instruct people. The power available to these powers is used for works of unkindness and hatred, but they seek to spread error through mental influence, but only where the human will is turned towards evil. and therefore a transmission of strength in this form, where spiritual knowledge is imparted to people, must always be addressed as the working of spiritual forces which stand in the light, thus are receivers of light and strength from God, and thus are permitted as teaching forces, that is, are instructed by God to bring light amongst people and to spread wisdom, thus truth from God. The adversary of God will indeed spare no means to convey the lie and error to people, but he uses worldly-minded and materially thinking people for this purpose, and he also influences them in a purely worldly and material way so that they pursue all other goals than spiritual ones, and these neither recognize the error and the lie nor do they desire the truth. They are inclined towards the mental whisperings of the evil forces, and now they are active of their own will in the spreading of these by using their human ability to impart misguided teachings to fellow human beings in word and writing. However, these mediations do not reveal anything extraordinary. One cannot speak of extraordinary activity and supernatural power, which, however, indisputably reveal the spiritual writings. Amen.